I want to share some thoughts about a digitally enabled education, or head tech, and this is based on my experience over the last 9 months. My purpose is to stimulate debate. Like a lot of other people, I was very much upset by the prospect of suddenly having to move online, and to be honest, my main feeling was one of panic. How was I going to adapt? And I didn't seem to know anything. I had a real sense of unease as well, even dismay at the kind of narrative that I was hearing from the institution, that this would be a kind of an unproblematic transition, something that would make very little difference to the quality of outcomes and the quality of awards. The quality of the process would be much the same. And that wasn't what I was thinking or feeling. I mean, to me, it seemed to ignore a lot of reality, not least of which I'll call the technological deficit, my technological deficit, but also, for example, the absence of broadband in the west of Ireland. It was better than doing nothing, and I was glad to be able to do it so my students could finish out the year. But it seemed to me fanciful to think that this would be seamless and unproblematic. And it seemed highly likely to me that my efforts, despite how much I tried, would probably be suboptimal. I was also feeling a bit overwhelmed by what I call the savior narrative of the tech evangelists. I was feeling that I was being deluged relentlessly with messages of positivity about the cool tools that I should be using and what they could do for me and how they could help me and how they could help the students, and that if I wasn't using them, there was something seriously wrong with me. I was a bit reminded of the song, "The Future's So Bright, I Gotta Wear Shades," and I didn't seem to have the shades available. It wasn't working for me, and the only thing this kind of savior narrative did was to add to my general sense of panic, anxiety, and stress. I think I was suffering from what I'll call head tech, head wreck. Then I had an epiphany of sorts. I began to realize it's not about the technology. It's not about the cool tools. What it's about is education. I needed a certain level of competence, Teams, Zoom, that kind of thing. But essentially, it was about doing something that I'd been doing for a long time and something that I cared about, education. It was a different medium, but essentially it was still about education, and that's what I should focus on. And education is about what it's always been about. It's about fostering student development. It's about nurturing the person. It's about what Yeats called the lighting fires, not the bucket filling. And in that sense, I could feel a bit confident. It involved interpersonal communication. It involves interaction on an intellectual and emotional level with students. It involves a shared commitment between me and the students, me as a teacher, around a shared commitment to a process. And it's both an individual and a communal experience, and it's greatly influenced by the context in which it happens. So the question for me changed. How was I to do education online, not how was I to do online education? And what I began to focus on was, how could the technology help me do what it was that I wanted to do, which was education, what I had always been done. I began to realize as well that I was totally dark in the medium. I already knew and understood a lot from experience. I'd grown up all my life with radio, with TV, with film. I had some media and communications training during my career. I've been using PCs since 1984, and I'm reasonably familiar with video conferencing. I've used it quite a bit over the time. Now, it was this kind of thinking and this kind of stepping back from the technology that allowed me to get on with it, and that I could say formed what would be considered to be a relatively low tech, what might be called tech and type approach. So what do I think about head tech now that I'm kind of at the other side and have been doing it for at least 9 months? Well, it has value and merit. It would be silly not to admit that or not to recognize that. But it has powerful advocates, and its value and merits have been well articulated. If anything, they've been over articulated. So what I want to do here is just to flag a warning about some potential drawbacks and dangers associated with head tech. And it seems to me that these haven't been given sufficient attention in the uncritical rush to embrace this kind of brave new world. And they're twofold. One, that head tech is a siren song, and the second is that head tech could lead to what I'll call head wreck. And both these things are interconnected. A siren song We need to guard against the seduction by the technology. It's a technology that's evolving rapidly, but to a great extent, it's untested as a medium for higher education. It promises a lot, but whether it can deliver, that remains to be seen. It's a very remote and personal, cold, isolating, alienating, lonely medium. It lacks soul. Sometimes I feel like I'm teaching into the void. And it changes the nature of the relationship that I have with students and the nature of our interaction, and not always, I think, for the best. It creates illusions of proximity, illusions around communication, mirages of communication, forms of communication, but that potentially could be the substance of the communication could be distorted by the medium. It creates a false sense that we're all the same. And I think this masks individual and socio-cultural differences and inequalities. It could contribute to exclusion, and it kind of distorts and obscures the complexity of the interpersonal process that's going on. This friend, my friend Mark Garvin, expressed it wonderfully well, I think, when he said we're creating a geography of absence through an online mode of presence. Head tech is good for content transfer, we know that, but I would argue that it's more suited to bucket filling than to firelighting, and in that sense it could cause damage to higher education in the longer term. So is higher head tech leading to head wreck? Well, it certainly has implications for the nature and quality of higher education and for the institutional framework, and maybe we haven't given these enough consideration. So it's critically important that we should question the assumptions, the pedagogical assumptions that underlie it, the institutional assumptions that underlie it, and test out what the potential long-term consequences might be before we rush to adopt it any more than that. For example, what are the implications of pre-recorded scripted education? What are the implications of recording live lectures, for example? The impact on the dynamics of the educational process. Will it result in a loss of experimentation, a hesitancy to experiment? Will it result in a censorship in the head? Will it ultimately compromise academic freedom? We already know that it has implications for academic integrity, and that's creating difficulties at this stage. It could also drive the further massification of higher education, the commodification, commercialization, and privatization of higher education. It could result in a more uniform, standardized, fragmented form of higher education. It could lead to an even greater focus than now on learning outputs-based education and a pedagogy that's grounded in constant assessment and monitoring, a form of grad grind education. It could drive the McDonaldization of higher education, to use Ritzer's phrase, governed by predictability, calculability, efficiency, and controlled by the technology. And it could lead to an Uberization of higher education, the casualization, pay for performance, content surveillance context, that kind of business model. And if that happens, then that changes the nature of the academic's relationship to the institution. So head tech, head wreck.